And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube reading guide series. Today is the 10th in a 14 video series walking through the correct reading order of Superman. To create the Superman guide, I've read the 1700 single issues that comprise the shared Superman continuity from 1991 all the way up until Flashpoint in 2011. That includes the essential spin-offs, tie-ins, miniseries, and event issues. And I've used that knowledge to build this, the internet's most detailed reading guide for the world's most famous superhero. By now, you'll know that this guide takes the form of a Google Sheet that I've split into 14 tabs, representing the 14 discrete eras I've split this period of Superman reading into. This can be viewed and downloaded for free on my website, and generally each era or tab is going to be bookended by a major DC event that I'll also be releasing a separate video on. This playlist will contain every Superman video and every DC event video in chronological order. However, if you're only interested in the DC events, they will also be collected in a dedicated 11 video playlist that is going to be available separately on my channel. Before we get started, I do always say please do watch the introductory video for this series. That's going to explain a lot of very key concepts. For example, it will explain why this guide starts in 1991, no earlier. It will also explain concepts such as type P and type J readers, and of course it will explain key concepts like what I mean by Superman triangle numbers and things like that. But with no further ado, let's go straight into it. What we have here is the 10th era of Superman reading. So, as always, I say please read this one row at a time. So if, for example, I'm on this row here, read that issue. If I'm on the row below it, then read the issue that comes next, and so on and so forth. Each row only has a single issue on it, and each issue will have some kind of notes or details on it to explain exactly where that issue fits in, or any sort of detailed context or background information there. So remember, please just start at the top and work your way down line by line. Last time we covered the Joker's Last Laugh event in a dedicated video, and before that we covered the 9th era of Superman reading, which was a mere 8 issues from November 2001 to December 2001. In other words, it was the short period between the Our Worlds at War event up until the Joker's Last Laugh event. Today's going to be slightly different. Today's we're covering 94 single issues. That's from January 2002 up to February 2004. In other words, we're covering from where Joker's Last Laugh the event ended, up to the release of the Superman Metropolis maxi series and the Godfall story arc. So we're not going up to an event today, and in fact in tomorrow's video we'll be looking at the 11th era, so there is no event ending this one, but I do end this era at what I feel is a very sensible and clear cutoff point. Interestingly here, what we're about to see is a very clear decoupling from the previous very tight reading order with the end of the Superman triangle era. So with no further ado, let's go up here. We've got the first story arc, which I've called Connective Issues or Final Triangles. And these are 4 single issues that represent the end of the Superman triangle era. So we start off with Superman 176, and as you can see, that's triangle number 1. That then moves on to Adventures of Superman 598. Now, keep in mind, this is marked as triangle number 6, but is marked as triangle number 6 in error. It's worth noting as well that Adventures of Superman number 598 references his battle with the Fatal Five in Superman 171, which we saw a few videos ago. And note that this issue is also the Cult of Persuasion prologue, with the rest of the Cult of Persuasion issues actually being Adventures of Superman 601 onwards. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. After that issue, we then have Man of Steel issue 120, in which Clark fails to use journalism to take down a LexCorp crime. If we look at that, we're back to triangle number 3 here, again compounding the fact that this one is numbered triangle number 6 completely in error. And then the very final triangle numbered issue for now is this one. It's Action Comics 785. It's the end of the triangle era. It's triangle number 4. It's worth noting that this issue is actually comprised of 12 scenes that are in reverse order. This is not a printing error. It's just a weird thing that happens in this issue. Okay, what we're about to get into now is what I like to consider to be the decoupled issues. As you can see here on the side, that's what I've called it. The triangle numbers now out of the window. So this is how I would recommend reading Superman at this point on. So we've got Adventures of Superman 599, then issue 600 as well. Just read those two. We then get into a two-part arc, which is Cult of Persuasion 1 and Cult of Persuasion 2. In Cult of Persuasion Part 1, there is a protagonist in this who's basically some guy wielding an axe. He's called a Persuader, and that's never really made very clear. But yeah, this is what it is. Cult of Persuasion is just a two-issue arc. In Cult of Persuasion Part 2, I put this here because at this stage, Clark is still working at the Daily Planet. So minor spoiler warning, there's going to be a period where Clark is no longer working at the Daily Planet. But I've used where he's employed and what he's doing as a good way of tracking down the correct reading sequence. After Adventures of Superman 602, we then have a three-parter, which is 603, 604, and 605. This features the Crime Syndicate of America. So those are our Adventures of Superman issues. What we then move into is a series of arcs which I consider to be the Man of Steel arcs. We've got issue 121 and 122. That then takes us into a three-parter, which is 123, 24, and 25, called Gangs of Metropolis. And then subsequent to that, we have a two-parter, which is called Pantheon. Pantheon Part 1 and Pantheon Part 2. Pantheon actually features the character of Wonder Woman as well. Okay, we read Man of Steel. We now need to move over to Action Comics. So we've got issue 786, which is a one-off issue showing the return of Jumper Sally from Action 785, which we saw back up here. Obviously, that was the last Triangle issue. Well, that continues here. We've got the 786 issue there. That then leads into a two-parter called Mercy, Love, and Blood, which is frankly a mess. And that then leads into another two-parter. This is issue 789 and 790 called Man and Beast. Issue 789 features Krypto and the character of Cancer. That's Cancer with a K, which we've seen in the last previous videos. And then Man and Beast Part 2 actually references the death of a key character that happens in Our Worlds at War. And we then have Action Comics 791. Okay, that then takes us to the Superman issues. These are pretty straightforward. We've got Superman 177. This is a Christmas issue that introduces the new Toyman. It also ends with a cliffhanger involving Lois and Lex Luthor. Then we have issue 178 with an amazing cliffhanger involving Lex Luthor. We then have issue 179, which frankly is one of my favorite Superman issues of all time. Issue 180 features Dracula. In fact, I'm going to pop that in here as a note. One thing I would point out to anyone watching this is that this is a live sheet that I can edit as I go along. So if anyone does find anything that they think would improve this sheet or any notes I should add in or anything I should change, please do let me know. Issues 182 and 183 are called The Secret. Please note that this is now the end of Jeff Loeb's run on the title, and Jeff Johns is actually taking over full time now. In fact, he co-writes some of the previous issues. Issue 183 ends with a key event in terms of Clark working at the Daily Planet, and given that Action Comics 792 is set at a time when he's no longer working there, that makes it very clear that should then be read after issue 183 of Superman. Hopefully that makes sense. We've got some completely decoupled issues here, as you can see. Adventures, Man of Steel, Action, Superman, and then one final Action issue. That then takes us to a story arc called Return of Krypton 2, where despite there being a lack of triangle numbers, these are the four issues in tight plotting. We've got Superman 184, Adventures of Superman 606, Man of Steel 128, and Action Comics 793. This tight four-issue arc resolves all the weird questions around this second Krypton that we had back from the first Return to Krypton arc back in the 8th era. After this, we're then looking at some connective issues. So these connective issues are just four standalones that can be read in any order. We have Superman 185, Adventures of Superman 607, Man of Steel 129, Action Comics 794. Like I say, these can be read in any order whatsoever. Next, we have one of my favorite ever Superman arcs, which is Ending Battle. This is in order and again, there's no triangle numbers, so you just have to follow my reasoning here. We have Superman 186, Adventures of Superman 608, Man of Steel 130, Action Comics 795, which is one of the best Lex Luthor issues ever. We then also have Superman 187, Adventures 609, Man of Steel 131, and then Action Comics 796. This arc is one of my favourite Superman arcs of all time. The fact it's not collected in an oversized hardcover is criminal. The fact it's in an out-of-print trade paperback is a crime against humanity. And yeah, I would strongly recommend reading this. That then takes us to, again, a bunch of connective issues that can be read in any order whatsoever. So, in no particular order, we have Superman 188, which is a brilliant issue about Superman dealing with the emotional after effects of ending battle. We then have Superman 610. We have Man of Steel 132, which I kind of suspect is the last ever appearance of Mr. Mxyzptlk. And then we have Action Comics 797, which is an excellent standalone issue again. Okay, that then takes us to Lost Hearts, which is a very clearly titled story arc. It's explicitly labeled that way on the covers of the issues, and even though there are no numbers, these issues do need to be read in the following order. It's Superman 189, Adventures of Superman 611, Man of Steel 133, and Action Comics 798. At this stage, we've got a couple of random kind of decoupled arcs here, as you can see, and I'll talk you through all this up to the end of the video. The most interesting one, I guess, is Man of Steel 134. This is the final issue of the Man of Steel series. Note that this comes out in March 2003. Now, I put it here because Clark doesn't yet have his normal job back at the Daily Planet. But the reason I mention this comes out in March 2003 is because also in March 2003 we have this issue, which is Superman versus Darkseid, Apocalypse Now. Now, that's basically the finale for Man of Steel as a series. You have issue 134, and then you need to read Superman versus Darkseid, Apocalypse Now. There is something I'm going to have to point out here, which is quite confusing. I've got some notes here, as you can see in the text, but ultimately, this story is got some unusual stuff about Supergirl. It involves the Linda Danvers Supergirl we've seen up until this point, which used to be a shape-shifting alien called Matrix. But in late 2002 of that series, in other words, issues 75 and 76 of the Supergirl series, a new Supergirl was introduced. However, that Supergirl was a short-lived creation and was soon retconned out of her own stories and went back to her own dimension. That short-lived weird Supergirl is the one featured in this issue. It's not the Linda Danvers one. However, in late 2003, so a couple of months after this issue comes out, the new series Superman Batman got launched, and we'll talk about that more later at the end of this video. Issue 8 of that series, which was released in May 2004, finally brings Kara Zor-El as Superman's cousin back to Earth. But that's a different Kara Zor-El to the one we briefly see in this issue. I know that's confusing. You'll find it confusing when you read Superman vs. Darkseid. It's a good issue, but the whole Supergirl aspect is very, very, very confusing. What you'll note here is after those two issues, I then have just a blank line here. And the reason I have that is because there's an important note that you need to look at here. Again, you see my notes here on the sheet, and when you download that, you'll see that. But the important thing to stress is that the Man of Steel series is immediately followed by the launch of the Metropolis or Superman Metropolis maxi series. Note that the Metropolis maxi series is completely distinct to the Secret Files and Origins one-shot we mentioned in the 8th era. But we are going to come back to that 12-issue maxi series and actually look at it at the start of the next era of reading, which is going to be the 11th era. So yeah, slightly confusing, but don't worry about that. It's all clear in the written guide, and I will be talking you through. So with Man of Steel finally out of the way and that series done and dusted, what do we have next? Well, we've got a bunch of Adventures of Superman arcs. So firstly, we have an arc which I call the Heroville arc. As you can see there, I decided to call this arc Heroville. That's issues 612, 613, 614, 15, and 16. Note that issue 614 references wartime events that set this in the midst of the Harvest story, which is happening in Action Comics at the same time. We'll discuss that in a second. After issue 617, we've got a 2-issue arc showing a new and dangerous variation of Mr. Mxyzptlk called the Mixie Twins. That continues in issue 618. Then in issue 619, we have a 2-issue arc I like to call Election Trail. In issue 621, we have a 2-issue arc called Minuteman, which has nothing to do with Watchmen. Don't get confused. And then in 623, we have a weird, kind of slightly depressing one-shot issue. I can now recognize these offhand as they tend to be the tone of the end of not necessarily a series, but a writer's stint on that series. So in this, what we can see is this is actually Joe Casey's last issue writing Adventures of Superman, and 623 is kind of his swan song issue. That's Adventures of Superman. Let's hop over now to Action Comics. And with Action Comics, we start off with issue 799. This references events happening over in the Flash comics, but don't worry about that. You don't have to read the Flash comics. And then we have Action Comics 800. This is a double-sized anniversary issue. It's a mix of different flashbacks about how Clark became Superman. Again, you'll see there in the notes, we've got some notes there explaining it on the sheet, and of course that's in the written guide as well. What we then have is the Harvest arc. So this starts off with issue 801 from Action Comics, and that features Tracy 13. At this point, Clark still doesn't work at the Daily Planet. It shows the country of Bialia for the first time, and Zod puts his grand plan into motion. Now this ends with a direct cliffhanger into the Harvest arc, so I count this as being essential to reading the Harvest arc. Frankly, it's impossible to locate this sensibly, however, as it appears to happen exactly parallel to the events of Heroville, which remember we saw up here. So it's a little bit confusing. Like I said, issue 614 references the Harvest event, but the Harvest event happens here, and it's so tightly plotted it's really hard to work out where it happens relative to Heroville. If you want to try to mess around reading half an issue here or a couple of panels here and a couple of panels there, feel free to do so. But I'm not a type P reader. I don't believe in the irrational and incorrect fallacy that there's a perfect way to read comics, and so you just have to kind of balance these in your head at the same time. Action Comics number 802 is the second part, or rather Harvest Part 1, but the second part of this block I've got here. In this, Clark reminds Lex of the events of Heroville, which at this point have clearly concluded, so it's a little bit surreal and strange trying to fit it in. Then we then have 803, which is another part of Harvest, 804, which is the next part of Harvest, and the final part of Harvest is Action Comics 805. It's called Harvest Part 4. Overall, it's a disappointing climax and resolution to the Zod story. I really felt like Zod was an amazing character. This should have been a DC-wide mega event and not a 5-issue Superman arc. It's worth noting at this point as well that this is roughly when the Superman-Batman series starts. So that happens round about during the end of Harvest. Anyway, after Harvest, we then have a 3-issue arc called Hungry Ghost, parts 1, 2, and 3. That's Action Comics 806, 807, and 808. Note that that story is a sequel to Action Comics 787 and 788, which was the story Mercy, Love, and Blood we mentioned just a little bit earlier. That's up here. There it is. Mercy, Love, and Blood. So this is the sequel to that. Not an especially good or fun little arc, to be honest. The covers make like it's actually called Supergirls. At least Action Comics 806 is set up like that. In fact, here's the cover. You can have a look at that. Note that the actual Supergirl in it is Cyril, who we were introduced to in the 10 Cent Adventure, but we haven't read the 10 Cent Adventure yet. I know, it's confusing and it's complicated. However, this clearly takes place after the Future Smiths arc, which is something we'll talk about again in a few moments. So then we have issue 807 and 808, so I recommend reading it in that order. And we then have issues 809 and 810. 810, again, being a slightly maudlin arc, is a sentimental standalone arc when Dan Abnett takes over, as we can see there. Okay, it is confusing. I am conscious of that. Please just use the guide, either follow through on the videos and read in the order that I'm saying, or alternatively, use the written guide, which you can purchase off Amazon, or download the Google Sheet, which you can do for free off my website. The final bit of this part, which is the 10th era, is this bit here. Now, it starts off with a one-shot called the 10-cent adventure, which was some kind of publishing stunt. Later on, we'll see the 12-cent adventure, which I think actually might have been a Batman issue. But these are like random publishing stunts that happen every now and again, especially at this point in DC's publishing. So it's a normal-sized issue that then leads into, as we can see here, Superman issue 190. Now, a later reprint of this actually reprints the 10-cent adventure, making this double-sized if you get the right Superman 190. Anyway, we then have Superman 191, and we then start what I like to call the patronymic story arc, which is a two-issue story arc, patronymic part 1 and part 2. That's issue 192 and 193. So then we've got a few random issues. We've got issue 194, 195, and 196. In 194, Clark gets his normal job back at the Daily Planet. And then issue 197, this is a bit weird. It specifically states it happens before the current events of Action Comics, which I suspect is a reference to Cyril appearing in Hungry Ghost. It ends on a clear to be continued sort of issue. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I like to call this the Future Smiths arc. That's what I've named it. And that continues on at issue 198. And issue 199, which explicitly says it's after Action Comics 806 to 810. However, as this is after that arc, the Hungry Ghost arc, it doesn't really make any sense for that to be the case for reasons that I'm not going to spoil here. And finally, part 200 of the Future Smiths arc is this. It ends on a cliffhanger. All the notes are there, but what I'll say is this is not then picked up in the first arc we start the 11th era in. The 11th era is going to start off with an arc I like to call Strange New Visitor, but actually this issue here, issue 200, is going to lead into the Godfall arc. Do you know what? Let's just have a quick skip ahead and have a look at it. This is it, the Godfall arc there. But like I say, that's not relevant now. With Era 10, this is what we're looking at. We've got number 200 here. The important thing is that this is going to dovetail in with the Metropolis maxi series. That issue 200 is also a 64-page anniversary issue and includes a Supergirls pinup by Mike Deodato Jr. Interesting to note, at the end of that arc, the Future Smiths arc, and the defeat of the main antagonist, all of the events relevant to the 64th century character Brainiac 13, including the Metropolis Brainiac 13 conversion, all get reversed. That means it pretty much dovetails in perfectly with the end of the 12-issue Metropolis Maxi, which we're going to be starting off the 11th era with. So, spoiler warning, let's move to the 11th era. You'll see there at the top I've got Superman Metropolis there and the issues there. But listen, this was Superman Era 10, 94 issues. Hopefully that was helpful. In tomorrow's video, we're going to dive into the 11th era. So I'll see you then. And there we have it. In case you're interested in knowing where these resources are, so the guides, the maps, and so on, they're all available on my website. They're all available for free. You can go into the website, which is nogodsorkings.com, and download the Google Sheet for the Superman reading order, or you can go on the website and look at these reading maps for all the various DC events and a whole bunch of other things I've got on there to your heart's desire. If, however, you are interested in a written version of this guide, then it is available on Amazon. I've recently just self-published it. It is the cheapest possible tier you can get on Amazon. So it's 79 pence UK, 99 cents American, and so on. It's free if you're on Kindle Unlimited, and there is a free sample on the website as well. The reason I put this onto Amazon is kind of a proof of concept. I'm interested to see if people are interested in the written guides, whether or not people want to pick them up. And also it's a good way for me to bat off all the people that are going to be in the comments asking for a Batman guide. If you want a Batman guide, I don't really particularly have any interest in doing one, but I will do one if this book gets 500 reviews. So if this book gets 500 5-star reviews, then I will start doing a Batman reading guide at some point. I don't think that's going to happen, but there we are. Of course, feel free to support the channel by picking this up. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, the best way to support the channel is by picking up one of my other books, which isn't a non-fiction reading guide. It's actually a fictional, completely original superhero story. It's prose, so not a comic or words, but it's about superheroes in just a really interesting kind of post-apocalyptic dystopic idea. The first 4 books of the series are out, and if you want to support, please pick that up. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay classy.